It started quietly. No announcements, no headlines. Just a name on a deed. In 2014, on the lush, rain-soaked island of Kauai, Hawaiians began to murmur about an unfamiliar buyer acquiring land, one parcel at a time. A name whispered between neighbors, on fishing boats, and at local cafes. Mark Zuckerberg. It wasn't long before locals realized this wasn't just a vacation house for the billionaire. He wasn't here for sunsets and surf lessons. Something bigger was unfolding. A private road appeared first, almost overnight, cutting through thick jungle. Then came fences, tall, opaque, with signs warning trespassers. Helicopters were occasionally spotted hovering, and trucks came in under the cover of early morning fog. None of it fit the sleepy rhythm of Kauai's North Shore. From the outside, it looked like another tech mogul chasing paradise. But inside those gates, beyond what drones or curious hikers could glimpse, a silent empire was being built. The estate would be unlike anything Hawaii, or Silicon Valley, had ever seen. They called it Ko'olau Ranch. By the time the rumors turned into news stories, the scale of what Zuckerberg had acquired was staggering. Over 1,400 acres of pristine land, waterfalls, valleys, cliffside views, forests untouched for generations. But what no one could understand was why. Why so much land? Why the secrecy? Why here? And then came a single detail that ignited international curiosity. A massive underground structure buried deep beneath the earth. A 5,000-square-foot subterranean space built with concrete, steel, and mystery. Some said it was a tech lab. Others swore it was a doomsday bunker. But the truth? The truth was still buried, both literally and figuratively. And only one man knew the full answer. Mark Zuckerberg had begun writing his own chapter of history, beneath the palms of Hawaii and behind walls thicker than speculation. But that was just the beginning. While the public eye stayed fixated on Zuckerberg's tech ventures, Meta, the metaverse, artificial intelligence, a different kind of vision was taking shape far from boardrooms and keynote stages. In the early stages of construction at Ko'olau Ranch, a small group of professionals arrived on the island under non-disclosure agreements so ironclad that even their families wouldn't know where they were. These weren't just ordinary architects or engineers. They were veterans of secure facility design, men and women who had previously built embassies, intelligence outposts, and high-containment research labs. Their blueprints? Untraceable. Their communications? Encrypted and cleared through layers of private networks. Every movement was logged. Every conversation held behind closed doors. And every decision was signed off by one person, Mark. The design of the estate grew more intricate with each passing month. 2 central mansions, one perched higher for panoramic surveillance, the other embedded into the hillside for natural camouflage. Between them, a tunnel stretching underground like a vein, connecting the 2 hubs in secrecy. But it was what lay beneath the ground that fascinated even the project's inner circle. At 5,000 square feet, the underground structure was no mere storm shelter. It included living quarters with provisions for extended stays, a mechanical room pulsing with systems meant to sustain, not just survive, a blast-resistant door as thick as the secrets it kept, and, most curiously, a vertical shaft with a ladder leading to an escape hatch built into the rocks above. It was as if every potential scenario had been considered. Natural disaster, attack, breakdown of society. And yet, publicly, Zuckerberg maintained his stance. It's just a basement, a practical addition. But the choices spoke louder than the statements. As structures began rising above the ground, sleek yet eco-conscious buildings, guest houses, and the now famous disc-shaped tree houses connected by swaying rope bridges, locals watched from a distance. The estate blended into the natural landscape with surgical precision, yet it hummed with technological intent. On the surface, luxury, sustainability, tropical peace. Below, purpose, planning, and perhaps paranoia? Still, Zuckerberg remained silent. No press releases, no interviews, just the sound of jungle wind brushing against solar panels and the faint rumble of machines beneath the soil. But soon, a new layer of complexity would be added, not from the inside of the estate, but from the island community itself. Because when a man builds a fortress in paradise, the land doesn't just watch, it remembers. At first, it was only whispers, a few raised eyebrows at town meetings, gentle murmurs during weekend luau's. But as months turned into years, the silence surrounding Ko'olau Ranch began to feel heavy, like pressure building beneath a volcano. The people of Kauai had seen wealthy outsiders come before, celebrities, CEOs, even royalty. But this was different. This was territory, not just property. This was hundreds of acres once walked by ancestors, hunted on by great-grandfathers, farmed by families for generations, now sealed behind private fences and security cameras. Locals noticed strange changes. Roads quietly rerouted, ancient trails suddenly gated. Drones flew overhead more frequently. Construction trucks arrived by barge, their deliveries shielded from public view. Rumors spread of entire archaeological sites being bypassed, even bulldozed. And then came the lawsuits. Zuckerberg's team, in a move to secure complete ownership, had filed a legal process known as quiet title, a method that allows landowners to resolve disputed ownership claims. But in Hawaii, where ancestral lands often pass down informally through generations, it meant something else entirely. It meant forcing families, many native Hawaiian, into court to prove ownership of land their ancestors had stewarded without paperwork, but with deep living memory. The backlash was swift. Protests formed at the property's gates. Signs were raised. Chants echoed through the valleys. News outlets finally caught wind of the tensions, and headlines began to shift from marveling at the estate's features to questioning its morality. Billionaire or bulldozer? Silicon Valley's island fortress raises native ire. And yet, even as public scrutiny intensified, the project didn't pause. If anything, it accelerated. Reports emerged of massive water tanks being installed, capable of sustaining life independent of local infrastructure. Solar grids were laid down. The estate's own agricultural system, complete with livestock, orchards, and greenhouses, quietly bloomed behind closed gates. It was no longer a mansion. It was a compound. Some began to wonder, was this Zuckerberg's retreat from the world, or his new kingdom? Through it all, Mark remained mostly silent. When asked, he framed his intentions as philanthropic, even environmentally conscious. His family, he noted, had donated to local schools and conservation projects. But to many Hawaiians, the equation didn't add up. Helping with one hand while acquiring with the other wasn't kindness. It was strategy. And beneath the tension, something more primal was stirring. Because this wasn't just about land, it was about ownership, legacy, and the ancient truth that no one truly owns the earth. Especially not here. From the air, Ko'olau Ranch now looked less like a residence and more like a civilization carved into the forest. Aerial photos were rare. Drone flights over the estate were quickly intercepted. But on the few days when clouds parted and satellites snapped pictures, the scale became impossible to ignore. Two grand mansions mirrored one another across a private ridge, gleaming with curved rooftops designed to reflect sunlight and deflect aerial heat scans. Between them, the tunnel stretched silently beneath the terrain, its existence confirmed only by leaked architectural documents and insider whispers. Inside the underground shelter, things were no less astonishing. The walls were lined with servers, independent communication networks, and filtration systems capable of scrubbing air in the event of chemical exposure. Emergency rations were stacked with scientific precision, each door reinforced. each room designed to support life for months. But perhaps the most curious feature was the library. Hidden behind a blind wall disguised as simple paneling, it held rare texts, some rumored to be original Hawaiian manuscripts, others bound volumes on philosophy, psychology, and survival theory. Handwritten notes from Zuckerberg himself were found inside, detailing what he called resilient design thinking, ideas centered around long-term civilizational planning. He wasn't just building a retreat, he was rehearsing for collapse. And that realization unsettled even those closest to him. Some of his personal staff began to resign, quietly, respectfully. A few couldn't stomach the secrecy. Others, it seemed, simply couldn't bear the psychological weight of what was being built, because despite the swimming pools, the treehouse villages, and the jungle gardens, something about the place felt claustrophobic, too perfect, too prepared, too quiet. Outside the gates, the people of Kauai pressed on. Protests became organized petitions. Local radio stations ran talk shows debating the future of their island. Elders came forward, speaking of sacred grounds, of spirits displaced, of warnings ignored. Yet inside Ko'olau, time ticked on. Zuckerberg, now more present than ever, began spending longer stretches on the property, sometimes weeks at a time. Rare sightings captured him walking trails alone, or meditating near the cliffs. He spoke little to anyone outside his circle. But inside the estate, changes were underway, new facilities planned, new algorithms designed to automate systems within the compound. It was no longer a home. It was a thinking machine, a self-sustaining organism. And Mark was its architect, its caretaker, its test subject. And in his private notes, one line was underlined more than any other. If the world changes overnight, this place must already be awake. The deeper the walls of Ko'olau Ranch were fortified, the louder the silence outside them became. But silence, on this island, wasn't surrender. In the small town halls of Kauai, where wooden floors creaked under the weight of generations, community elders began to share stories they'd held for decades. Stories of the land's soul, of mana, spiritual power, that flows through the mountains, rivers, and trees. Stories that didn't make headlines but echoed louder than any construction equipment could. A respected kupuna, a grandmother of 9, stood during a meeting in Hanalei and said softly, "He thinks this land will protect him," but he never asked if the land accepts him. Around her, heads nodded. The issue was no longer just about property or privacy. It was about presence. In response to growing unease, Zuckerberg's team launched community outreach initiatives. Donations increased. Scholarships were offered. Cultural consultants were brought in. Yet many residents saw these as offerings to the wrong gods, attempts to buy harmony instead of listening for it. Meanwhile, within Ko'olau, the systems grew more advanced. Water from rainfall was filtered and stored in the estate's 55-foot-wide underground tank. AI-managed greenhouses adjusted to humidity levels in real time. Satellite uplinks guaranteed private, unbroken communication in case of catastrophe. Even the tree houses, built to feel whimsical, were engineered with fiber optic links, biometric locks, and emergency rappel systems. But a fortress, no matter how advanced, cannot shield a soul from isolation. Zuckerberg's presence on the estate became more consistent. Those close to him observed subtle changes: fewer calls to California, longer hours spent in the underground facility, more pages scribbled in his journal. In one entry, later leaked, he wrote, "We build networks to connect the world, but I can't help wondering who I'm disconnecting from in the process." And outside his fortress, the island responded in a language Zuckerberg hadn't fully prepared for. At night, locals would gather outside the gates and chant old songs, not in protest, but as reminders of what was here long before the compound, long before the cameras, long before him. Sometimes the chants echoed through the valleys. Sometimes they reached the estate. Sometimes they reached him. Security never stopped them. Orders were strict. No confrontation. No headlines. Only silence. Because behind the walls, where digital dashboards monitored climate trends and emergency supply levels, one thing couldn't be measured: the weight of belonging. And soon, the question shifted from, what is he building, to something deeper. What is he trying to survive? The rain had returned. It fell in long, slow sheets across the ridges of Ko'olau, washing over treetops and stone pathways, beating against the titanium-lined roofs of Zuckerberg's mansions. The jungle pulsed, alive and ancient, while inside the estate, machines hummed with a rhythm not unlike a heartbeat. There were no visitors, no journalists, no neighbors with casserole dishes, just the compound, watching itself, endlessly. Inside, every hallway was lit by soft motion sensors. Every panel of glass was armored. Every step had been measured for both silence and survival. Mark walked those halls alone now, more often than not. His family came and went, but something about him had shifted. Staff noticed it in the way he lingered near windows, stared longer at rain clouds, or paused before descending the staircase to the bunker. He still worked, still coded, still met virtually with engineers across the globe. But something else had taken hold. He had become a keeper of a secret, one even he couldn't name. Below, the underground shelter was more than complete. It was operational. The air purification system ran seamlessly. Biometric locks restricted every room. Servers synced only with encrypted backups, no external dependencies. The escape hatch, nestled into a rock bluff behind a false grove of palms, was tested monthly. Everything worked, and yet he hadn't used it. Not really. He spent time down there, of course, read, meditated, monitored the data, but there was no apocalypse, no pandemic, no invasion, only the soft, unrelenting quiet of potential futures that never arrived. Still, something gnawed at him. Outside the estate walls, the world didn't end, but it changed. Climate events intensified. Political lines blurred. Privacy grew rarer. Platforms crumbled. Empires of influence began to fracture under their own weight. And in Kauai, the people remembered. They remembered the forced quiet title suits. They remembered the trees that were cut. They remembered the chants that went unanswered. But more than anything, they remembered the feeling of being watched, of being measured, of being outlived. They couldn't stop him from building his sanctuary, but the land could withhold its welcome. A week before the rains returned, a small traditional ceremony took place at the edge of the estate. Not a protest, just a gathering of elders and children, offering chants, offerings, and silence. No cameras, no confrontation, just presence.